Okay, we're going to talk about section C of the English exam, which is about argument and persuasive language. Okay, so I've looked at some of the past papers, class notes, study guides and things like that, and I've read through them, and I can narrow it down to saying that this is really about two skills. Okay, the first set of skills that you need to use is analysing the different forms of media, and then once you understand the argument and persuasive language in use, then it's structuring and writing your essay answer. Okay, so analysing, looking back at all the past exams, we're looking at all sorts of media. It can be an editorial in a newspaper, it can be a speech, it can be a blog, it can be a visual, it can be combinations of these things. I think, for example, last year it was a speech with 2 slides. The year before that it was an editorial with a response from somebody writing in. There was the year before that, in 2015, it was speeches with some photos. So there's a multitude of things that you could get to analyze, but the skills that you're going to use to analyze the text and the visuals is going to be the same. So I'm going to break it down into these 2 skill sets. We're going to spend some time, first of all, focusing on how you analyze the text, and I will be back in just a second to begin that. Okay, so when we're thinking about tackling the exam, I want to look at it in terms of the following. I want you to consider it a microscope. Here's a picture of what I hope it looks like a microscope, because a microscope allows you to zoom into different areas of whatever it is you're looking at. So I'm classifying them here as 3 different things. The first thing is the big picture. If you zoom out, let's put zoom out. If you zoom out all the way, you will see the big picture, you'll see the entire thing. If you go in a little closer with your microscope, you can look at sections of an object, and then if you zoom close in, you can really start to see the details. So when you're looking at the editorial or the text, whatever it is for the exam, you have to sort of think in this microscope, zoom out, zoom in kind of concept. Okay, and what I'm going to propose, and this is important here, is that when you're in the exam, you do 3 readings of the material. The first reading is going to be to give you the big picture. The second reading is going to narrow your focus into sections and certain other things like the arguments of the text. And then finally you're going to go into the third reading, which is going to be all about the evidence that you need, which is the proper language analysis. So for the moment, let's just remember that. When you look at your text in the exam, you're going to do 3 readings. Each one maybe 4 or 5 minutes long, because I think you get about 15 minutes at the start to read. So you're going to use those 15 minutes to do 3 readings and get all the information you can before you structure your answer. Okay, so let's have a look at what you're going to do in those 3 readings. Okay, so if we have a look at what the 3 readings will consist of in a little bit more detail, the first one, when you do the first reading, we're going to be answering the very big picture questions. What is this about? What is the event? What was the incident? What's the issue? Why did the issue come about? Those are going to give us some of the big picture answers. We want to think about what the author is saying and why they're saying it. Okay. In other words, what we're looking at here there is purpose, and the purpose might be in protest of something, in challenge of something, attacking something, refuting something, and so on and so on. And then the last key thing is, what is the author's stance here? What is their central message, or what we're going to commonly call their contention? Okay, so on your first reading, a broad thought process will answer those key big picture questions. Then you go back and you do a second reading. So the second reading is then going to focus more on the sort of sectional stuff. So we're going to be asking, what are the key arguments that the author is making? Are there any difference in the arguments, or are they supported by the other media, visuals or responses? And then we're going to ask, what is the target audience or the stereotyped audience? Who is the author talking to? How does the author want these people to be positioned? What is the impact of the media source? And then lastly, is there a tone? And does the tone change? And in that sense, we're talking about, is there humor? Is it friendly, aggressive, upbeat, ominous, and so on and so on. So in the second reading, we're looking for those three key things: the arguments, the audience, and the tone. Okay, and then finally, we do the third reading, and this is when you get down to the details. So you've zoomed in with your microscope, and now we're looking at, the specific language and how it's used to persuade. And what's important here, I just want to make this, is that this is evidence, and that's what we're looking at, the evidence to support the arguments that we're making. Now, there's a lot of them, but I want to try and just group them together as follows. When we're reading the third time, we're looking for appeals. We're looking for quotes of specific language that can support the arguments and the views that we have. We're looking for any facts which give authority to the arguments. Are there any calls to action? Does the author want the audience to do something? Let's just skip down here for a minute to style. What's the overall style? Is it a formal piece, an informal piece? Is there logic to it? Is there some humor? Is it academic, poetic? And so on and so on. And then lastly, the key tools. And there we are looking, let's just change the color a little bit. We're looking at these different things that come together to help make the language more eloquent or argumentative or whatever it might be, which helps the argument or the persuasion. So we have to look for the evidence of these things in the third reading. And this is arguably the most difficult part. But hopefully, if you've taken the steps before, you've already built up a good idea of what the media is about. It sort of follows on from that. So those are all the key ones that we're looking for when we do the third reading. Okay, so that is how I suggest you approach this part of the analysis of the exam question. Okay, and what we'll do now is we'll put this into practice, and we'll do three readings of one of the past exam questions. Okay, so coming up in a second. Okay, so this is the 2011 Section C exam, the analysis of language use, and we're just going to jump straight into it. Okay, the most important thing here is to read the background information, so don't skip over that. So let's have a look at that. Helen Day is a part-time journalist and blogger. Okay, so she's a blogger. She maintains her blog entitled Street Beat, okay, in which she comments on a variety of current social issues. So it's a current social issues blog. This blog entry, The Power of Ink, okay, is about tattoos, and it has drawn a variety of responses from readers of her blog. So obviously that's something which helps us. It is about tattoos, and it's on a blog, so we know the media source immediately. Okay, let's carry on 1 second. Okay, and the blog continues then, The Power of Ink, so that's obviously the title, so we'll just highlight The Power of Ink. And then the blog starts. Once a sign of deviance and criminality, they're now a fashion statement. Everyone has tattoos these days, even me. I live near a mega shopping centre, and every time I visit I see enough ink on suburban housewives to outdo the collection in any Australian prison. Okay, what we'll do is we'll just read it paragraph by paragraph and try and pick out some of the things that the author is saying. Just in a general sense. Once a sign of deviance and criminality, they're now a fashion statement. The other thing that she's saying is that everyone has tattoos these days, even me. I live near a mega shopping centre, and every time I visit I see enough ink on suburban housewives to outdo the collection in any Australian prison. Okay. Since newsreaders, sitcom stars and upmarket shoppers began to draw roses, skulls and Latin phrases on their flesh, the power of ink has diminished. The deviant nature of the tattoo has faded. Okay, so the nature of the tattoo has faded. Okay, well, like a tattoo. Okay, so what we can see here is that there is some evidence of the contention here. I think the power of ink has diminished, the nature has faded. Once a sign, they're now a fashion statement, means that there's a change. There's a change in what tattoos have become, and they've become far more common, and therefore the power has diminished. Okay, so I think this is sort of like the main issue that the author is describing, and the contention here I think we've picked out is that therefore the power of ink has diminished. Okay, let's carry on. Okay, then the author continues with the blog. It was not always so. That's an isolated sentence, so that suggests that it's important. From the earliest times, tattoos almost always meant trouble. First the Greeks and then the Romans inked the unconsenting backs of prisoners and slaves. The practice continued in Europe throughout the Middle Ages to mark the deviant and the incarcerated. Okay, so this is looking back at some history. Okay, we can look at prisoners and slaves, the deviant and the incarcerated. That seems to support what the author was saying at the beginning. The indelible cruelty of the prison tattoo can still be seen living in the flesh of those who survived the concentration camps of World War II. There is little that suggests the horror of this genocide more than those numbered tattoos. Okay, so there's some definite points of view there, and what we can say is that this has become a look back in history for what tattoos have been in the past, and I think in that sense it probably gives some context to the argument that the author is making, and obviously these are more factual things which are going to lend weight to the arguments. Okay, if we look at the visual here, and there's a reason why it's been placed here. Tamoko is a Maori body art. So this tamoko is a Maori body art practice which shows that the wearer has status within the community. Tamoko can also tell the story of the wearer's family heritage. Okay, so this visual here has been placed intentionally to show some contrast with what's been said over here. Tamoko is to do with heritage, status, family values, the standing and status within a community, whereas in history elsewhere it was to do with the deviant, incarcerated, the prisoners and the slaves. So that's a nice contrast that's been made there. Okay, let's carry on with the rest of the blog. The blog then continues. The tattoos are an indication of control, a sign that the bearer had a value over somewhere between property and machine. When something is imposed without our consent, we tend to develop a strong sense of satire. From at least the 18th century, those who had been marked by the state as deviant began to create their own tattoos. Convicts were known to mock the king by having the words property of Mother England etched into the flesh on their backs, and by those means, those who flogged them. Okay, so there's some strong words there. And again, I think these are largely factual and historical context for the argument. What is interesting is then to have a look at the other visual, which the author has think, no tattoos before you're 30, what I'll tell my children. Okay, this suggests that, you know, the youth are silly to get tattoos, and it's ill-advised. It's not something that they should be looking to do. No tattoos before you're 30. Okay, the rest of the stuff is sort of more factual stuff. Okay, and then we'll just quickly flip over the page and look at the last bit. The last bit of that sentence reminded that they were vandalizing the property of the crown, so it's kind of a bit satirical from the prisoners there. In the 20th century, those traditions of defiance persisted. Okay, so tattoos are seen as defiant. In the 1980s, tattoo artists set up shop in every Australian shopping strip, and it was in one of these new body modification boutiques that I and many other young women dared to defile our femininity. Okay, body modification, so there's even a terminology there for tattoos. Back then, a handful of us angry young things had symbols of our gender affixed to our own bodies. Tattoos have now become sexy. So again, there's this idea to how they've changed, and even adorned the ankle of the British Prime Minister's wife. Okay, so that's kind of interesting. Personally, I find this profoundly annoying. Okay, that's kind of important there, isn't it? Here I am stuck not with a real memory of my feminist youth, but an indelible kinship to Britain. The tattoo has been commodified. Okay. And now performs more or less as it originally did. It is fashion's proprietary mark. It's difficult, of course, to imagine a time when a tattoo marked anyone, man or woman, as a try-hard. For a brief moment, however, I did feel the reckless abandon of carnival unfolding on my skin. And now I look at the symbol of my rebellion and I see an ornament as ordinary as any other cosmetic quirk. Okay, so what can we pull out from some of those? Here we have this idea of defiance in history, and then, you know, extending that to a kind of rebellion. But then the fact that the power of ink has faded means that there is now some response, and the response is to be sort of irked or annoyed at what's happened. And therefore, that gives the purpose of the blog to make the contention that tattoos are now just fashion items, so they've lowered the value of them. And therefore, you know, think twice before getting one. And you know, there's sort of a little element of protest in there. So I would say that with that first reading, we've pulled out the key big picture points. You know, the issue, the reader's experience, the author's experience, looking back at history and how it's changed, how our own choice to get a tattoo has been eroded. The key contention or central message has jumped out at us. So we've gained quite a few things from that first reading. Okay, I'm going to leave this tutorial today, but we'll come back with this same media and do the second and the third readings to pull out even more information. Okay, be back soon.